Today's Wisdom Time. Uh, this evening, I'm sorry if I halt it, but I'm hearing feedback. This evening, we'll be talking about know thyself. Know thyself. We're going to start by taking a look at an overview of 2020, because I think it'll help us put in perspective what knowing ourselves is. It will help put in perspective our self-perception. We will then look at what is self-perception, which in essence is knowing who we are. And this differs from self-esteem or self-worth or self-love. We will then look at the struggle we have with self-perception. And it's a widespread struggle. The struggle to define ourselves, the struggle to remain true to how we have defined ourselves, if we have defined ourselves. And then we'll look at the implications of ignorance of self. And then we'll touch briefly on who are we? Who are we really in the real sense of it? So let's start with an overview of 2020. 2020 has been a year like no other. It will go down as exceptional. It will go down, we're in the midst of living history. It will go down in history as one of those years referred to, that made a landmark, that made a major impact on planet Earth, that made a major impact on the way we do things, on the way we see things, on the way we do business, on the way we worship, on the way we congregate. It will have a major impact for many more reasons as well. 1.7 million people worldwide have lost their lives to COVID. The UK economy in this 1 year, at the depth of the pandemic, shrunk by 25%. US unemployment hit 15% in April 2020, the highest ever since records began. If anyone beforehand had predicted that 2020 would be like this, we would have all laughed. We would have all said it was so far-fetched. I even remember, even when the pandemic started spreading in Europe, a lot of people saying, we can't go into a lockdown in Europe. We can't go into a lockdown in the Western world. We live in a free society. Here we are, still in the midst of various tiers of lockdown. In spite of everything that's happened in 2020, in spite of the challenges, in spite of the job losses, in spite of business closing down, in spite of lives lost, friends, brethren, family, lives lost, in spite of this all, 2020 has presented its own opportunities. 2020 has presented options for us to move things forward. 2020 has provided a number of things for us. The first one is the gift of time. Time we would have spent commuting, time we would have spent partying, time we would have spent traveling, time we would have spent going on holiday, time we would have spent visiting friends, has been given back to us, or was given back to us. And it has been up to us to decide what to do with the year. In retrospect, and I know the year is not fully over, and I know the lockdown might spread into 2021, but so far, it almost feels like the year of Jubilee, described in the Bible, where everything rests, everything could be reset. Whatever is redeemable could be redeemed. A year where everybody returns home or stays at home. It's a year that has given us the gift of time. It's a year of opportunities in terms of what we could do with that time. It's a year of reviewing various options of how to make the best use of the time it has given us. So here are some examples of what the gift of time of 2020 has given us. It has given us time to think and reflect. And I'm not talking about thinking about things that could go wrong, or things that have gone wrong, or things that have not gone the way we want them to go. I'm talking about being introspective. There's no need to rush to catch the bus. There's no need to rush to catch the train. There's no need to dash out of the house early in the morning. There's no need to run those numerous errands we run around. There's no need to visit friends and family. There's no need to party and attend events. There's no need. So we've had the time, and we still have the time to chew on life. So cast our minds back over this year, over previous years, over our life in general, in terms of things that we have done well, in terms of things that we have not done so well, in terms of things that we could improve on, in terms of things that we need to drop, in terms of things that we need to pick up. It has given us time to identify strategies for our lives for the future. It has given us time to know what to retain. It has given us time to assess our own performance. And no one else can really assess this for us, because we know the plans we've made. We know the standards we should live to. We know the extent to which we need to push ourselves. It has given us time to identify how we can improve. It has given us time to identify the fragility of life. With friends, colleagues, brethren lost to the virus, all of them started 2020 with no idea of what COVID-19 was, or probably heard about it distantly as some virus that was going through China. 2020 indeed has brought home to us. A man's days are like grass, and the days are evil. Days are evil basically means the days are short. Another thing 2020 has afforded us is it has afforded us time to seek God. As I'm going through all of this, it is not over. So there's still the opportunity to take advantage of these opportunities. There was a time and a place in CUMI Liberty House, Northampton, where we had 3 services a week. So we had one on Sunday, which was the main service. We had Bible study or wisdom time on Wednesdays, which we're having now, and a prayer service on Friday. At the height of the pandemic, we had a prayer service 3 times a day. Even as we speak, we have a prayer service 2 times a day. Basically, the lockdown / pandemic gave us the opportunity to seek God on a deeper level, to seek Him more. It gave us the opportunity to be able to fast as much as we wished, with no risk of maybe fainting at work or fainting on the train. It gave us the opportunity to go on personal retreats in our home, to spend time with God, to spend time in the Word, to rue and ruminate and meditate on God's Word, to seek Him more, to understand His laws more, to understand His ways more. 2020 has afforded that opportunity and is still affording that opportunity. 2020 afforded us the opportunity to spend time with loved ones. The lockdown forced us to stay at home. The lockdown is forcing us to stay at home. London is back in full lockdown, for instance, and in Northampton here, we're potentially going into a higher tier pretty soon. It forced us or gave us the opportunity to build and enhance relationships with people close to us. Although I have to admit, this has been both for the good and the negative. I mean, statistics have shown that domestic abuse has increased a great deal across the world, not just in the UK. To the extent that the place where I work actually had to put on a specific program on domestic violence for people who wanted to attend this and to highlight where they can get help from. That's one of the fallouts of the lockdown, because people might be forced to stay with their abusers, for instance. 2020 has afforded and is still affording us time to spend on our gifts and purpose. It's time to write that book. And I'm talking to myself as I'm talking to everybody. It's time to start that business if you haven't started it. It's time to become more creative. It has afforded us time to become more creative, to diversify and modify existing businesses, to enter into new areas, to enter into new markets. It has afforded us time. Even when people are working from home, you don't have to commute. You don't have to go to meetings where you physically have to be there. You don't have to go out for lunch to go and buy your lunch. It has afforded us time to upgrade our skills. I know of people who have gone on numerous courses online during the lockdown. It has afforded us that opportunity to learn more, to grow more, to read more, to research more, to understand more. If we haven't taken advantage of those opportunities now, 2020 is not over. It has given us time to save, or more like the opportunity to save. With few open restaurants, hotels, pubs, no commuting, no holidays to go to, no buying lunch at home, not going out with lunch with friends and family, not going out to dinner, not partying. Households have saved, or household saving in the UK has risen by 100 billion since the lockdown. So we've all put money away, or majority of people have put money away because we're not spending it on things we could have spent it on. Even if you go to town in Northampton and across the UK, the rate of Christmas shopping is not the same as it used to be in previous years. People are not traveling to go to stay with loved ones because it's not allowed under the law. So people are doing minimal shopping, although admittedly people are shopping online. On average, people put aside 30% of their income, the highest ever since records began. So there's a pent-up demand. Because the truth be said, the worst of the unemployment figures really affected certain sectors, like airlines, like travel, like hotels, like retail. When I say retail, I'm talking about shops, not even so much so grocery shops, but other shops like clothes shops like Primark or Marks and Sparks and Debenhams, Topshop, all of which have gone into liquidation during the pandemic. So economists believe there's a pent-up demand. With all this money stashed away, there's pent-up demand waiting for the lockdown and waiting for COVID to move on. The question, though, we should be asking ourselves is, what will we be spending this pent-up savings on? Is this the time to permanently readjust our spending habits? Or are we going to go back to ground zero, where we were before the pandemic? It's worth asking ourselves these things. The lockdown and 2020 has afforded us the opportunity to cut back and save. The year 2020 has given us time to invest, or given us the opportunity to invest. Apart from increased savings and an extra 100 billion, I'm not even sure what the figure is in the US. Most Western economies at this point in time are awash with cash. This recession that we're in is very, very different from the last one we were in 2007/8. Right now, we are awash with cash, like I said. The last one, there was a crunch on cash. There was a squeeze on cash. Economies are awash with cash, mostly because of COVID measures that were put in place by governments in the West. So like furlough schemes or bounce back loans or commercial loans, extra commercial loans. In addition, banks are very, very eager to lend because interest rates are really low. So it is giving us the opportunity to invest. There's capital available to use wisely. There's support schemes available to use wisely. UK shares have been the cheapest they have been in a very, very long time. And some specific funds, like the LNG US fund, for instance, have done very well. US shares are growing very well, are doing very well. The LNG US fund, for instance, grew by 16% this year. So there are opportunities for investment. If we haven't started or have not made a habit of this, now is as good as time as any. Like I said, there are lots of schemes out there. I'm not saying go and get a scheme fraudulently, not at all. But this cash available can be used wisely if we qualify for them. 2020 has allowed us to reveal our true selves, to reveal our true nature. There's less distractions these days. Like I said, there's less socializing, there's less going out, there's less catching the train, there's less going to the office, there's less going on holiday. So there's less opportunity to try to impress others. You can only impress so much over Zoom. We can only manage our reputation so much remotely. Similarly, with most people working from home, or most people, or people not working at all, on furlough or being made redundant, there's no one holding us to specific standards. There's no one insisting that you have to be in the office at a certain time. There's no one insisting that you shouldn't take 2-3 hour lunch breaks. There's no one insisting that you don't go home before the end of the day. There's no need to get up at a certain time. There's no need to catch the bus at a certain time. This is the time for self-governance. And how well have we done? Or how badly have we done? Is basically a revelation of our true selves. People who haven't showered for a week, for instance, because they don't need to go out or sleep 10 hours a day. This is our true self being revealed. And our true self being revealed doesn't mean that we should knock ourselves down or beat ourselves up. It's basically an indication, if we don't like what we're seeing, to begin to improve, to begin to change, to begin to work more on self-governance, to begin to work more on holding standards that we have defined for ourselves. So that is an overview of 2020. And the next step, basically, or the next area we're going to look at is self-perception. And basically, how we define ourselves, how we identify, or why we struggle with self-perception. So, What is self-perception? Before I go into the definition of self-perception, especially in our community, is not something we talk about a lot. We talk about what people think about us. We talk about what or how society may define us, for good or for bad. We talk about how God defines us, God's perception of us. But we rarely talk about self-perception. And there are reasons for this, which we'll go into later. But basically, let's touch on what is self-perception. Self-perception are those conclusions we have reached about ourselves. Sometimes we hear people say, I'm not good at this, or I'm bad at that, or I'm excellent at this. These are conclusions very often we have reached by ourselves, which may or may be true about who we are. Self-perception is who we see ourselves to be. What I think of myself, genuinely. Not when I'm talking to others and I'm basically trying to give a reputation of myself, or who deep down within me, in my thoughts, think of myself. It's the way we see ourselves on the inside. Because sometimes the way we see ourselves on the inside is very different from the way we talk about ourselves on the outside. It is how we see our place in the world, how we fit into our environment, how we fit into the various worlds we operate in. Whatever conclusions we come to about ourselves, we came to that by ourselves. It may be influenced by other factors, but that conclusion is reached by ourselves. It's important to understand that self-perception is very different from self-esteem or self-worth. Self-esteem or self-worth is the value or the honor we place on ourselves based on the perception we have on ourselves. Self-esteem and self-pride or self-worth is not pride. It is in essence giving value to ourselves, understanding the value we have. Because self-esteem and self-worth will drive things that we will or will not do. Will set our standards, the standards we choose to hold ourselves to, not the standard the world holds us to right now, but the standards we hold ourselves to. It allows us to identify personal principles. Understand that self-perception is about ourselves. It's not about what others believe about us. To quote the author and entrepreneur, Robert Kiyosaki, the only person who determines the thoughts you choose to believe about you or yourself, it's you. So it's a very, very powerful concept, self-perception. So let's move into why we struggle with self-perception. And there is a struggle with self-perception. If we ask a lot of people who they are, we will get a variety of answers which we'll come to later. But God said to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. If God had known Jeremiah before he formed him, how come we then struggle to know who we are? Our source, our creator understands us fully, knows who we are, even before we became aware of who we are. So why has it become a struggle? And there are some reasons that we can explore. The first reason why self-perception is a struggle is because it's not standard practice. It's not required of us. From our mid to late teens, we're already encouraged, we're taught to think about the career we want, what profession we want to go into, what area we want to spend the rest of our lives pursuing. We give thought to where we would like to live. We give thought to how much we would like to earn. We give thought to other choices in life, like how we want to marry or who we want to marry, how many children we want to have. But we don't give much thought to our definition of self. We're not taught to have and hold on to a clear definition of who we are. Majority of people, if you ask them who they are, they'll come up with age, name, job title, or even relationship with others. As in, I am XYZ's son, or ABC's daughter, or XYZ's husband. If we ask that question in church, as in, who are you? Or we ask church, or who are you? We get platitudes like, I'm a child of God, or I'm saved and sanctified, or I'm truly and indeed blessed. While these things are not inaccurate, it doesn't specifically define us. God has millions of children. I mean, anyone who believes Jesus is Christ, is the Christ, is actually is a child of God. So who are we really? Apart from the definition society may have given us, apart from the definition that is I am, well, our bioreason doesn't even really define us. Apart from what we do, who are we? We have not been encouraged to explore. We have not been encouraged to chew on. Another reason we struggle with self-perception is that we don't make introspection habits, and it's very much linked to the first one. And introspection is not always encouraged. Introspection is going deep within and searching answers that are deep within ourselves. We're often told not to daydream too much. Or in certain cultures, in parts of Africa, we're not encouraged to think too deeply, to be pensive, to ruminate. Because it is seen as if something is wrong. Why are you thinking? Why are you quiet? Why are you pensive? What is wrong? But part of being introspective. It's part of understanding who we are. The world we live in doesn't encourage introspection. There's a cacophony of voices clamoring for our attention. From social media to the mainstream media, to friends, to family, to events, to all whatnot, to work, to career, to purpose. Everything is clamoring for our attention. In this multimedia age, we want to be part of it all. We want to see it all. We want to have it all. We have the fear of missing out. We want to be part of everything and anything. We want to be seen as part of those who know what is happening, those who are in the place where it is happening. Sometimes, personally, I suspect we use a lot of activity. We use a lot of noise to numb the things we really need to do, or the things we may have discovered about ourselves that we're not entirely happy with. But to discover who we are, we have to go inwards and seek guidance from above. It's a principle of creation that all seeds are within. All seeds are within. Every fruit has its seed within. Everything in creation has its seed within. So to identify who we are, we have to search within and also reach out. Another reason why we struggle with self-perception is the systems of the world. The world defines us because it suits some people to define us. Systems are used to define us, to put us in boxes. Like I said, because it's convenient for some and it's advantageous for some. So we have categories like the employed versus the employers versus the unemployed. We have categories like the rich versus the poor. We have certain categories like this race versus that race, or stereotypes that this type of jobs are suitable to that kind of race. I remember a previous boss of mine who at some point in time traveled to Saudi Arabia on business. And when she arrived, she was asked to join a particular queue, directed towards a particular queue, and she waited in that queue basically to be attended to. And while she was still on the queue, the person who was to pick her up from the airport came into the airport and saw her on the queue while she was waiting to be attended to. And she'd been on the queue for a while. And that person, who was a resident of Saudi Arabia at that point in time, said, "Oh, no, you're not supposed to be on that queue. That is the queue for domestic help. you're supposed to be on another queue. But she was automatically put in that queue because she was Asian, or she is Asian, and she is a woman. So the box she was put in basically came almost straight away because of what she looked like, because of what she appeared to be. And that is the way the world categorizes us. The worrying thing is that we sometimes believe it. In fact, we often believe those categories. Those categories encourage us to think of ourselves in a particular way, not to aspire to certain things or certain places, because it is considered not our place to do. I'll give a harsh example. I don't know too many Black people who aspire to be Prime Minister in the UK. It's a way of imbibing the categories the world has put us in. And we're not often in a position to contradict this because we haven't defined ourselves for ourselves yet. If we don't define who we are, if we don't identify who we are, if we don't have a clear-cut picture of our self-perception, then the world will tell us who we are. To quote Dr. Miles Monroe, the most important pursuit is self-knowledge, is to know who we are. Another reason why we struggle with self-perception is our craving for acceptance. And this hits the dichotomy between standing out and fitting in. To stand out is to risk rejection. To stand out is to go against the grain. Meanwhile, to fit in is to have acceptance. To be true to ourselves, to live our authentic selves, we would at some point in time have to eschew our craving for acceptance. The very essence of being outstanding is to stand out, is to be different, is to not go with the flow. And I'm not saying we just rebel for the sake of rebelling, but to be true to ourselves. We will at some point in time go against the grain, go against the status quo. Because the reality of the matter is we are on this planet to make a difference, not to go with the flow, not to conform to everything. Another reason why we struggle with self-perception is detachment from our source. God knows who we are. He knows who he created. He created mankind in his likeness and image. But above that, he created each and every one of us wonderfully and uniquely. And a lot of the times, we have not taken the time to develop that. As I mentioned earlier, the identification and perception of self comes from searching within and from seeking guidance from above. Christ knew who he was, and he declared it constantly. He was not concerned about what people thought, or if he accepted what he knew about himself. He declared, I'm the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. He declared, I am the bread of life. He declared, I am the true vine. He declared, I am. He declared, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. He kept declaring because he knew. He kept declaring because he was confident. He kept declaring because there was no doubt about who he was. He kept declaring because he was continuously in the Father. He was continuously attached to the Father. He was continuously reflecting the Father. He said, when you see me, you see the Father. He continuously was enmeshed, embedded in the Father. So when we begin to lose sight of who we are, it's important again to stand back and see if we are becoming detached from ourselves. So now let's have a quick look at the implications of not having self-perception. And I've called this the ignorance of self, the implications. If we don't know who we are, we will take our self-perception from others. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be people in authority, And it starts to get really, really dangerous when we start to look for definitions online. When we start to look at the media, when we start to look at social media and religion. Yes, I said religion. The transatlantic slave trade was fueled by religion. As is often said, Caucasians came to Africa with the Bible in one hand and the sword in the other. The Dutch Reformed Church was a strong supporter of apartheid. Told people of a different race that you're lesser. Religion led to 9/11. Religion led to the slaughter of millions during the Crusades. God has not called us to be religious. God has called us to be righteous. And there's a big difference between being righteous and religious. To be religious is to follow certain routes, follow certain rites. And when I mean rites, I don't mean rites of darkness but basically just follow certain procedures. So I pray 2 times a day. I go to church 3 times a week. It is focused more on the outside. It is focused more on what people can see, on what others can judge, on how I act. To be righteous is more intrinsic. It is about my thoughts. It is about pleasing God. It is about His law. It is about what I do in private. It is about what I think of in private. It's about what I choose in private. So there's a key difference. It's not about what we're seen to do. It is about what I know to do and indeed doing it. To quote the author, Audre Lauder, if I don't define myself for myself, I'll be crushed into others' fantasies of me and eaten up alive. Because others' fantasies of me would always be for their benefits. If we take an example from the Bible, there is no way that Joseph's brothers would have come to tell him that, you know what, in future, at some point in time, in the not too distant future, we will come bowing down to you. Joseph had to discover that and understand that himself. And even when he did and he shared it, they mocked him and slapped him down. Another implication of not knowing oneself is that we take our perception from circumstance and events. A number of people have been laid off in this lockdown. A lot of people have lost their jobs. People have lost family. People have lost friends. These events do not define us. They're things we simply go through. But an understanding of who we are will help navigate how well or how badly we deal with these things. We're not our lost job. We're not the last thing we didn't do too well. We're not the last choice we didn't make so well. On the flip side also, we're not the last thing we did very well. We're not our bank accounts. We're not our assets. We're not the things we know how to do. It is more than that. It is about what our being is. It is about what the essence of our soul is. And when I talk about the essence of our soul, I'm not talking about it in a religious way, in terms of my soul will go to heaven. Indeed, it will go to heaven. But about my choices. It's about my standards. It's about how I value myself. It's about how I look at myself. It's about how I see myself, regardless of what may or may not happen. It was Paul the apostle that said, I know how to be abound and I know how to be abased. But whatever the circumstances is, I know how to deal with them. I know how to rise through them. Because who I am is who I am. Another implication of ignorance of self is that we will take self-perception for culture and tradition. Now, culture and tradition is also defined in such a way, similar to the world, that it suits some and it doesn't suit others. If we look at culture and tradition, then Barack Obama should never have been president of the United States. Or Kamala Harris should not be potential VP or the next VP of the United States, because those positions have traditionally, culturally, been the reserve of white males. But if we don't understand who we are, if we don't understand our capabilities, if we don't understand the definition of who we are, then we will look to those things and tell ourselves, well, they're not for me. It's not my place to do those things. It's not my place to go after those things. It's not my place to declare and deploy myself in a particular manner. That is against the norm. That is against the tradition. If we don't know our true self, we will struggle to find true north. True north is basically that place that points to what is the truth. True north is that place that points to what true principle is in our lives. When we struggle to identify true north, then everything and anything goes. Because when we stand for nothing, we will fall for anything. It was Miles Monroe that said, the greatest danger is ignorance of self, because it opens us up. It opens the space to fail in temptation. When you know who you are and you're tempted, you'll be able to say to yourself, that's not me. Those are not the standards I choose to live by. Those are not the principles I choose to live by. If I do A, B, C, it will breach my principles, because there's a standard to hold yourself against you. There's a definition to hold yourself against. When Adam and Eve was tempted in the beginning in the Garden of Eden, the fall really came about a loss of sense of self. The serpent went up to Eve and said, you know what? If you eat of this tree, you will be like God. And she was tempted by it because she wanted to be like God. It basically implies that something had happened. Something had happened between the time Adam and Eve got together and the time the snake came to them. Something had happened to their self-perception, because they were already like God. So while they felt they were no longer like God, or they no longer believed they were like God, had to do with their self-perception. That they felt they had to breach God's word, that they had to violate God's principle in order to gain what they thought was knowledge, had to do with their self-perception, or the loss of self-perception, the loss of self-identity. Because at that point, it appeared they didn't know, or they had forgotten that they were like God. After all, they were created in God's likeness and image. Another implication of ignorance of self is that it creates some incongruency with our conscience. So there's a tendency to do things that deep down within our conscience doesn't agree with, because we're not very clear. It's not clear-cut to us who we are. It's not clear-cut to us how we live, how we choose to live. One very useful tool that I've learned and I try to do is I've written down who I am, who I would be, what qualities I would have. And I wouldn't tell you I'm 100% there. It's work in progress, continuously every day. It's work in progress. So when faced with opportunities that will breach those standards, then I'll be able to tell myself, that is not who you are. As opposed to going with everything, and then somewhere along the line, not feeling comfortable with the choices we have made. It was Mark Twain who said, your worst loneliness is not being comfortable with yourself. What's not being congruent with our conscience brings about is something psychologists call cognitive dissonance. And it's basically when you live a life that doesn't tie up with what your standards are. You live a life that doesn't tie up with who your conscience is indicating you should be. Now, our conscience, God gave the conscience to everybody, almost like an internal GPS system, almost like an internal policeman to tell you, you shouldn't go down that road. Or that road you just went down, you shouldn't have. And when we haven't defined ourselves, we end up not lining up with our conscience. The ignorance of self erodes faith and suppresses our God-given capabilities. So we see ourselves as small. We see ourselves as grasshoppers. We see ourselves as not being capable. So we don't have the faith to go forward. Because who we see ourselves as, the lack of not knowing who we are, how do we measure what we can do against it? Because there's no definition. It was Caroline McHugh in her TED Talk, The Art of Being Yourself, who said, people who are frightened to be themselves simply walk for those who aren't frightened, who can take risks, who can move forward, who can be bold, who have faith, who have courage. Ignorance of self erodes self-worth, because self-worth can only come from our understanding of self. The value we give to ourselves can only come from understanding who we are. And I want to highlight again that this is not a pride thing. This is a case of knowing who God made us, understanding who God made us, and moving away, not from the platitudes, but truly getting it, truly understanding it, truly assessing our mind, truly assessing our will, truly assessing our choices, truly assessing who and how I want to be in this world. Ignorance of self erodes courage. I referred briefly earlier to the spies who went to spy out the land when the children of Israel were going into were supposed to go into the promised land. The spies came back and they gave the report that we saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak. The descendants of Anak came from Nephilim, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And we looked the same to them. They basically did not engage the Nephilim because they went in there as spies. They basically went to look around the land, to spy the land. But they concluded that not only were they grasshoppers, but they believed other people saw them as grasshoppers. And so their actions tied up with how they saw themselves, they lost courage. And the implication for that was dire, because they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and an entire generation died in the wilderness, all from ignorance of self. So who are we? As I mentioned earlier, we look within and we seek from above who we are. This part is going to look strictly at who God, our Creator, says we are. Because the work to seek within has to be done individually. I have to do the work, you have to do the work. And like I mentioned earlier, it takes introspection, it takes thought, it takes searching God, it takes understanding who God made us. Now God said, let us make mankind in our image and likeness. So in essence, that means we are of God. We are made of God. We are made to operate and function like the ultimate creator. You and I are a masterpiece, a piece of the master of all of creation. Isn't that wonderful? God's word also says, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. So we shouldn't be intimidated by circumstance. We shouldn't be intimidated by obstacles. We should not be intimidated by challenges, because our inherent ability is that we can do all things through the one who gives me strength. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. In essence, I am wonderful. I am unique. I am different. And to be different is not a bad thing. To be different is to have an extra quality. To be different is to be special, because we seem so much to want to conform. And like I keep saying, we don't have to go radical. We don't have to be a maverick. But if we're true to ourselves, we would definitely be different, because different is not a bad thing. The spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So inherently, we have power. Inherently, we have love. We're worthy of love. We can give love. Inherently, we have self-discipline. We may not tap into it very often, but it's in there. It is in there. Because the essence of who we are, the source of who we are, is powerful. Our source is love. Our source is discipline. We can see it all around us. We can see the uniqueness of the planets around us. We can see the stars. We can see the universe. We can see how everything is so delicately and intricately made. It has to be from a source that is self-disciplined. He told the children of Israel in captivity, and this applies to us. I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. We might be going through a lot in this lockdown season. We might be going through a lot in this unique year that has been 2020. But his plans towards us, if we understand that and incorporate that into the definition of who we are, his plans towards us are not to harm us, but to give us a hope and a future. Very often we see God's laws as suppressive and repressive. They're not. They're basically to protect us. They're basically to bring the best out in us. They're basically for us to deploy the true essence of who we are. But remember, another part of his word in Deuteronomy says, but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who has given you the ability to produce wealth. Basically, that means all of us have the inherent capacity to produce wealth. Wealth should not intimidate us. The creation of wealth should not intimidate us. Any obstacles on the way should not intimidate us, because obstacles are there to build us, to stretch us. Obstacle, I heard someone say, obstacles are not in the way, they are the way through. So basically, those are the key points I wanted to touch on knowing thyself. So I'll open up the floor to any question before we land. So are there any questions? Please use the chat box. Please use the chat box to ask any questions. The CUMI Liberty House chat box to ask any questions. In the absence of any questions, then I think I would round up. Thank you very much for logging in, and thank you very much for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas and a happy New Year. God bless. Goodbye.